Classics Illustrated is a comic book series featuring adaptations of literary classics such as Moby Dick, Hamlet, and the Iliad. Created by Albert Kanter, the series began publication in 1941 and finished its first run in 1971, producing 169 issues. Following the series' demise, various companies reprinted its titles. This series is different from the Great Illustrated Classics, which is an adaptation of the classics for young readers that includes illustrations, but is not in the comic book form. Publication history Classic Comics Russian-born publisher Albert Louis Kanter created Classic Comics for Iliad Publishing Company in 1941 with its debut issues being The Three Musketeers, followed by Ivanhoe and the Count of Monte Cristo. In addition to the literary adaptations, books featured author profiles, educational fillers, and an ad for the coming title. In later editions, a catalogue of titles and a subscription order form appeared on back covers. Recognizing the appeal of early comic books, Albert Louis Kanter believed he could use the new medium to introduce young and reluctant readers to great literature. The first 5 titles were published irregularly under the banner Classic Comics Presents, while issues 6 and 7 were published under the banner Classic Comics Library with a 10-cent cover price. Arabian Nights, illustrated by Lillian Chestney, is the first issue to use the Classics Comics banner. With the 4th issue, The Last of the Mohicans, in 1942, Kanter moved the operation to different offices and the corporate identity was changed to the Gilbert & Company. Incorporated reprints of previous titles began in 1943. Wartime paper shortages forced Kanter to reduce the 64-page format to 56 pages. Classic Comics is marked by varying quality in art and is celebrated today for its often garish but highly collectible line-drawn covers. Artists include Lillian Chestney, Webb and Brewster, Matt Baker, and Henry Carl Kiefer. Oliver Twist was the first title produced by the Eisner and Idger shop. Some titles were packaged in gift boxes of 3s or 4s during the period with specific themes such as adventure or mystery. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Uncle Tom's Cabin were both cited in Dr. Frederick Wertham's infamous 1954 condemnation of comic books' seduction of the innocent. Original edition Classic Comics in near mint condition command prices in the thousands of dollars. Some Classic Comics issues Classics Illustrated The series name changed in March 1947 to Classics Illustrated with issue 35 The Last Days of Pompeii. In 1948, rising paper costs reduced books to 48 pages. In 1951, line-drawn covers were replaced with painted covers, and the price was raised from 10 cents to 15 cents. In addition to Classics Illustrated, Kanter presided over its spin-offs Classics Illustrated Junior, Specials, and The World Around Us. Between 1941 and 1962, sales totaled 200 million. The publication of new titles ceased in 1962 for various reasons. The company lost its second-class mailing permit and cheap paperbacks, Cliff's Notes, and television drew readers away from the series. Kanter's last new title was issue 167 Faust, though other titles had been planned. These titles appeared in the company's foreign editions. In 1967, Kanter sold his company to Catholic publication Twin Circle and its publisher Patrick Frawley, whose Frawley Corporation brought out 2 more titles but mainly concentrated on foreign sales and reprinting older titles. After 4 years, Twin Circle discontinued the line because of poor distribution. Since the series' demise, various companies have reprinted its titles. By the early 1970s, Classics Illustrated and Junior had been discontinued, although the Classics Illustrated branding would be used on a series of telemovies produced by Skiksoon Classics, 1977's Last of the Mohicans, 1978's Downward Pass, The Road to Survival, The Time Machine and The Deerslayer, 1980's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, 1981's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Adventures of Nellie Blee and 1982's The Fall of the House of Usher. Artists who contributed to Classics Illustrated included Chuck Abel, Stephen Adio, Matt Baker, Dick Brown, Lou Cameron, Sid Check, L.B. Cole, Reed Crandall, George Evans, Dennis Gifford, Graham Ingalls, Henry C. Kiefer, Alex Bloom, Everett Raymond Kinstler, Jack Kirby, Roy Krenkel, Gray Morrow, Joe Orlando, Norman Nodal, Rudolph Palais, Norman Saunders, John Severin, Joe Sinnott, Angelo Torres, Al Williamson and George Woodbridge. Classics Illustrated Jr. In 1953, Classics Illustrated Jr. debuted with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The line eventually numbered 77 fairy and folk tale, myth and legend titles, ending publication in 1971. Issues included miscellaneous such as an Aesop fable and a full-page illustration to color with crayons. Artists included John Costanza and Kurt Scharfenberger. International editions. British series equals. Of the 162 British titles, 13 never appeared in America. Additionally, there were some variations in cover art. UK issues never published in the United States include Iliad, The Argonauts, The Gorilla Hunters and Sail with the Devil. The British Classics Illustrated adaptation of Dr. No was never published under the US Classics Illustrated line, but instead was sold to DC Comics, which published it as part of their superhero anthology series, Showcase. The comic followed the plot of the film with images of the film's actors rather than Ian Fleming's original novel. Greek series equals. In Greece the series is named Ishii plus or minus I florin I to the first I to the first I 1/2 I cubed I plus or minus I 1/4 I 1/2 I plus or minus and is being published continuously since 1951 by I florin I micron I to the first I micron I to the first I squared I plus or minus I 1/2 I. It is based on the American series, with the difference that well-known Greek illustrators and novelists work to adapt stories of particular Greek interest. In addition to the titles that were translated from the US Classics Illustrated, more than 70 titles were published with themes from Greek mythology and Greek history. Ishii plus or minus I florin I to the first I to the first I 1/2 I cubed I plus or minus I 1/4 I 1/2 I plus or minus are read by thousands of young Greeks, and the first issues are of interest to collectors. The publishing house of Ishii plus or minus I florin I to the first I to the first I 1/2 I cubed I plus or minus I 1/4 I 1/2 I plus or minus I florin I micron I to the first I micron I to the first I squared I plus or minus I 1/2 I was founded by three brothers of the I micron I to the first I squared I plus or minus I 1/2 I family from the Greek-speaking parts of Asia Minor, I to the first I, Michaelis, Michael. Ishii florin I plus or minus I, car cubed stars. And I to the first I cubed Gia cubed Gos, George, collectively known as I plus or minus I micron I micron I to the first I squared I plus or minus I 1/2 I. They had extensive experience in publishing from the 1920s, mainly in advertising but also in children's books after 1936, when Ishii florin I plus or minus I micron I to the first I squared I plus or minus I 1/2 I finished his studies in the then modern printing techniques in Leipzig. The Petschli Vanadis brothers had inherited the printing press of Bavarian lithographer Grindman and his experience as well. Having worked for years with offset printing, the Petschli Vanadis brothers, already well known in the publications field, founded after the war the III florin I micron I to the first III plus or minus I 1/2 III house in order to restart publishing children's books. They had read Classics Illustrated while traveling in the US, and arranged to publish them in Greece as well. The first issue of Ishii plus or minus I florin I to the first I to the first I 1/2 I cubed I plus or minus I 1/4 I 1/2 I plus or minus was made available on March 1, 1951. It was an adaptation of Victor Hugo's Les Mis, copyright Rabelais, and attracted extensive critique in Greece, both positive and negative. It was the first American kind of comic in Greece and also the first four-color or tetrachromis offset. Its cost at the time was 4,000 drachmas, and the first edition went out of print quickly and was reprinted twice in the following days. Subsequent developments. 1990s. In 1990, First Comics partnered with Berkeley Publishing to acquire the rights, and Classics Illustrated returned with new adaptations and a lineup of artists that included Carl Baker, Dean Motter, Mike Ploog, P. Craig Russell, Bill Sienkiewicz, Joe Staton, Rick Geary and Guyan Wilson. However, the line lasted only a little over a year. In 1997–1998, Acclaim Books, the successor to Valiant Comics, published a series of recolored reprints in a digest-size format with accompanying study notes by literary scholars. The Acclaim line included Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, with art by Frank Giacoia, and The Three Musketeers, illustrated by George Evans. The series favored Mark Twain with reprints of Pudd'nhead Wilson, The Prince and the Pauper and Tom Sawyer. Other reprints in this series were Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, Herman Melville's Moby Dick and Nathaniel Hawthorne's The House of the Seven Gables. 2000s. In 2003, Toronto's Jack Lake Productions Incorporated revived Classics Illustrated Jr., also reprinting from the original editions. In 2005, Jack Lake Productions published a Classics Illustrated 50th Anniversary edition of The War of the Worlds in both hard and soft cover versions. In November 2007, Jack Lake Productions Incorporated, published for the first time in North America number 170 The Iliad along with number 1 The Three Musketeers, number 4 The Last of the Mohicans and number 5 Moby Dick. In 2007, it was announced that Paper Cues acquired the license and would begin publishing graphic novels starting with The Wind in the Willows. They will be combining reprints of some of the original titles with new modern adaptations, largely produced in France, the first of which will be The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, with art by Séverine Lefebvre. In September 2008, Classic Comics Store Limited, based in the UK, began publishing both the original Gilberton Classics Illustrated regular and junior lines for distribution in the UK, Republic of Ireland, South Africa, Australia and New Zealand. The issue number sequence is different from the original runs, although the junior series was in the same sequence as the original, but with numbering starting at 1 instead of 501. The covers were digitally cleaned up and enhanced, based on the original US covers. In September 2009, Classic Comics Store Limited announced that although they would continue to publish the Classics Illustrated titles, they were no longer publishing the junior series after issue 12, but rather importing the issues from Canada. This meant that the numbers used would be as per the Canadian issues. In October 2012, Classic Comics Store Limited no longer continued with a subscription service in the UK, because of the costs involved. The company told subscribers that they were planning on producing 4 issues at a time, but not on a specified time scale. The first of these batches was produced in October 2013. 2010s. In 2011, Marblehead, Massachusetts-based Trajectory, Incorporated issued the first digital editions of Gilberton Classics Illustrated regular and junior lines. In 2014, Trajectory, Incorporated was granted the exclusive worldwide rights to produce, distribute and license the brand. New publications for Classic Comics Store editions. July 2011, Nicholas Nickleby became the first new title in the 48-page series since the 1969 publication of number 169. The artwork came from the November 1950 Stories by Famous Authors illustrated edition of Nicholas Nickleby and retained the original Gustav Schroeter interior art. October 2012, The 39 Steps became the second brand new title to the Classics Illustrated canon. September 2013, The Argonauts was published, one of 13 which were never issued in the US collection, but only in the UK. References in popular culture. In the film Major League, Jake Taylor reads the Classics Illustrated edition of Moby Dick in an effort to impress his former girlfriend, Lynn, in the hopes that he might win her back. Later on in the movie, other teammates like Rick Vaughn, Willie Mays Hayes, and Roger Dorn start reading other Classics Illustrated titles, such as The Song of Hiawatha, The Deerslayer, and Crime and Punishment. A copy of the Classics Illustrated version of David Copperfield figures in the film Heaven Help Us. At one point, The character Caesar is baffled by why a book report written by his friend Rooney contains continued references to W.C. Fields instead of Wilkins Micawber. Rooney responds by displaying the cover of the comic book, which depicts Fields as Mr. Micawber, based on his role in the 1935 film. Classics Illustrated No. 108, Knights of the Round Table is mentioned in the Warner Bros./CW show Supernatural, Season 8, Episode 21, The Great Escapist. Hero Sam Winchester, ill and delirious, recalls to his brother Dean the memory of Dean reading the story to him when they were both small children. Sam laments that as he thought of the night's purity, it made him realize that, even though he was a child, he was impure, and that he always knew deep down he was impure. In Arundhati Roy's book The God of Small Things, Rahel wasn't sure what she suffered from, but occasionally she practiced sad faces, and sighing in the mirror. "It is a far, far better thing that I do, than I have ever done," she would say to herself sadly. That was Rahel being Sidney Carton being Charles Darrow, as he stood on the steps, waiting to be guillotined, in the Classics Illustrated Comics version of A Tale of Two Cities. Complete list of Classics Illustrated comic books. The authorship is based on the information held by Michigan State University Libraries, Special Collections Division in their Reading Room Index to the Comic Art Collection. List of Classics Illustrated comic books. The authorship is based on the information held by Michigan State University Libraries, Special Collections Division in their Reading Room Index to the Comic Art Collection. The titles and publication dates are obtained from a personal collection. See also: other companies producing comic adaptations of literature. Notes. References. External links, complete list of Classics Illustrated and Classics Illustrated Junior, Classics Illustrated by Trajectory with sample images, descriptions of each title and links on where to purchase each title. Classics Illustrated by Paper Cues, Classics Central, Review of War of the Worlds. Classics Illustrated, Review of Great Expectations, Comics Bulletin, In Praise of Classic Comics, Slideshow by Life Magazine, Classic Comics Store Limited, Modern UK Reprints.